This is the Candidly Kim podcast.
Welcome to the Candidly Kim podcast. We're here with our awesome producer, Doran.
I thought I was Fosmoo now. I wish you were Fosmoo.
Okay, Fosmoo, because we were talking about that, not that we're Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck, but they have their Snerdley and Stu.
Right.
And so we have a Fosmoo.
Yep.
And there's got to be a story behind that name. Do we want to know? Is it appropriate for all audiences?
It is. Yeah, it was just something my brother called me when I was a kid. Fozzolini Bumper Stomper.
Fozzolini Bumper Stomper. How in the world did that get shortened to Fosmoo?
It was kind of hard to say Fozzolini Bumper Stomper all the time. So.
Okay, so how did you get back at him for this?
Oh, I haven't yet.
So should he just be looking over his shoulder?
Probably.
Is this a brother I know?
Yeah.
Okay. Also just saw your parents who are, amazing, just stalwart conservatives in the community, have really driven for a generation or two conservative policy in our Utah political sphere. Your father served in the Senate?
In the Senate?
In the Senate.
From 1980 to 1992, I believe.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that was Bill Barton.
Yeah.
And he's legendary. And, really, we can credit him a lot with getting good conservative roots. And started, I guess, in partnership with some others, the UtahGrassroots.org.
Correct.
And they have a tracker. They produce a tracker on our state legislators every year that measures how conservative their voting record is. And I was always at the top. Are you surprised?
Not really.
So, always at the top. So, for our audience, every year, look about a month after the legislative session is over, you can go look and see who really did a good job and who not so much in our state legislature. But we have an amazing guest tonight. We're so excited. This is one of my favorite people, just one of my go-tos on economic and tax policy. That is not my strength. I kind of know the basics and the fundamentals, and I probably know it, though, a lot better than a lot of people. But, when I really need to get good, strong counsel on economic policy, especially tax policy, my go-to is Jonathan Williams, and he is the chief economist and executive vice president of the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is a conservative-rooted organization for state legislators. It's a bottom-up organization where legislators drive the policy.
And my dad was really involved in that back in the day.
Oh, was he? And tell us those years again.
1980 to 1992.
92. Well, let's welcome Jonathan onto the show.
Welcome, Jonathan.
Well, thank you. And as I always like to say, greetings from the land of make-believe out here in Washington, D.C. And it's great to be with you, my friend, Kim. And I wish I had better news, but there's very strange times out here in Washington for taxpayers right now, no doubt. Well,
I would have agreed with your calling it make-believe, but it's kind of a land of terror right now. That's a nightmare place, and the ideas that are coming out of the swamp that
the great Ronald Reagan would call it the island surrounded by reality. And I tell you what, he wasn't even around to see this era of nearly $30 trillion now of national debt. So it gets more that way every single year.
I remember when I was just kind of really starting to play in political advocacy, policy advocacy, and remembering just shuddering at 13 trillion and going, oh my gosh, that was this big scary moment. The debt ceiling wanted to be raised to 13 trillion, and where are we now? And just not very long later. And so what's happening in DC and Congress right now on tax policy and economic policy?
Well, I tell you, I said there's a lot of bad things out there. There's no doubt there's still a lot of threats for hardworking taxpayers across the country with the big government socialism agenda that is being pushed by the left wing of in the Congress, in the House and the Senate. And I guess the one silver lining of this discussion, and right now, as you know, Kim, there's something like $5 trillion of new spending and taxing proposals on the agenda. The silver lining, though, is there's something like a big, huge faction developing, that is really causing a problem for the left wing to get this across the finish line. And so, right now, as we have Speaker Nancy Pelosi, that is no stranger to big government spending ideas, and has been here for various battles, of course, over the years in that perspective. She does not seem to have the votes in the House, and Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader from New York, doesn't seem to have the votes in the Senate to be able to advance this kind of $5.5 trillion spending package. So, that is the silver lining right now is, I think, what the Americans see, the actual policies, regardless of the dollar amount being talked about right now. Some of these big government policies, whether it's the Green New Deal type agendas, whether it's the IRS snooping on your bank account. You've probably seen that in the headline news recently. These are some really big and scary government ideas that are being proposed. And I think, even these Democrats back in their districts are hearing from constituents saying enough is enough.
It's such an uncomfortable place to be, to have those margins in the Senate as close as they are, that the Senate Democrats need every single vote. And so thank goodness for a Joe Manchin that can do a little bit of math and history and say this really goes way, way too far. But it would sure be nice to flip some seats next year and not have to rely on Democrats to peel away from their caucus to make sure we keep our economy safer than what's being proposed right now. What can let's talk about how this compares to last year, and maybe let's just back up to 2017. What did you see as an economic policy analyst? What is the real contrast between those last couple of Trump years and a Republican-led Congress?
Well, you look at 2017, and I know you and I had this discussion back then, and you rewind the clock, and the United States was the very highest business tax country in the industrialized world, pre the Tax Cuts Jobs Act debate that President Trump signed into law late 2017. You had the business tax rate at 35% federally, and of course, Utah and other states add their own state level taxes to that. America was uncompetitive in a lot of senses, and we saw businesses leaving. This whole kind of discussion nationally that we had, a very painful discussion around corporate inversions, where businesses were becoming international. They were going from U.S.-based businesses to foreign-based businesses simply for taking advantage of lower tax rates abroad. And so we had this real discussion around American competitiveness and what it would take to make America competitive again when it came to tax policy. And thank God we were able to get the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act done, and we saw real tax relief for hardworking Americans across the board, individual and businesses, and America became much more competitive. And, of course, we saw the results from that in terms of record economic growth and job creation numbers. And then, unfortunately, we had hit 2020 and the unforeseen pandemic and the government shutdown, really the government-mandated recession, unfortunately, during those months during early 2020. And now fast forward to where we're at today, and at least when it comes to tax policy, we're talking about really turning back the clock and reversing so much of the progress that we had made during the 2017 period, where America became a very competitive place to do business, and we saw businesses bringing jobs and bringing manufacturing, which would have been unthought of. I mean, Kim, I'm a Michigan native, and I remember seeing a story on the Drudge Report saying that there was a Ford facility, I think, in Mexico that was actually closing down and leaving Mexico and moving back to Michigan and bringing manufacturing jobs and good paying jobs. And you would have said you're crazy if you would have, like even a decade ago, you said that would have been happening. But because of Michigan turning around and becoming more competitive and free market with right to work and lower taxes, and of course then with our federal tax cuts, that actually that kind of thing was happening. And now the discussion today, unfortunately, as I mentioned, is to turn back the clock on that progress and to really move America into a much higher taxed place. And so whether that is a move in 5 or 10 percentage points higher, that unfortunately puts a lot of American jobs at risk. And so this is a much different environment. It's a very defensive environment, I think, for taxpayers right now. And as you mentioned earlier, I mean, in a way, this is Joe Manchin's Senate. And it's, to some degree, Kristen Sinema as well from Arizona. But thank goodness for both of them as Democrats that are standing up to some of these big government progressive ideas right now and are saying, let's have a strategic pause. How many trillions of dollars have we spent collectively as a government and federal and state governments over the last 18 months during the pandemic? No doubt some of it was needed for healthcare reasons, but anytime that there's a crisis, as Rahm Emanuel or Saul Alinsky would say, never let a good crisis go to waste, unfortunately, and they've used it to grow government in some cases permanently. And so that's something I think we all need to be very vigilant to guard against the permanent expansion of government authority and government spending. So that's something, of course, we're watching very closely in D.C. And like I said, thank goodness for some really, I think, open-minded Democrats right now that are saying enough is enough to some of the most radical ideas.
Right, and thank goodness for that. And some of the specific things that Senator Manchin is talking about is a work requirement. And that's usually not what you hear from Democrats for different welfare programs and things like that.
No, but it's common sense, right? I mean, that's what the hardworking folks back in West Virginia, that's what they would like to see. And so Senator Manchin is, I think, absolutely representing his constituents in that case. And I think that's something that is a common sense idea. When you look at polling across the country, that's something that in these moderate districts all across the country, that's what Americans would like to do. They don't want to see what we've seen over the last 12 or 18 months, which is we tax people more who work and we pay people not to work. And then we wonder why we have a huge labor problem where we can't find workers to go back into the workforce. So the thing that has bothered me from the start here, Kim, is it's not the big businesses that worry me as much as it's the mom and pops and the NFIB members and those entrepreneurs that maybe have had a restaurant or a small business in their family for decades, and they were shut down by government order. Secondly, in a lot of states, they weren't as wise as Utah, but in a lot of the states, they allowed the tort lawyers to go and the trial lawyers to come and sue them potentially for these COVID-related lawsuits, where there's really a new cottage industry that came up to go after small businesses. And then one more thing that hit them, of course, is once they were allowed to reopen, is then they couldn't find the workforce, because we saw in so many cases people were making more money to stay at home and not work rather than go out and get back into their livelihoods. And so it's really a triple whammy of what's happened because of bad incentives and just bad, not very well thought out government policies.
I have to apologize for I had a little bit of a cough attack there. And not COVID, but so one of the things I was looking at, looking into the child tax credit today, is Senator Lee and Senator Rubio have proposed an amendment to make sure that any changes in that child tax credit don't have that same result that we saw in this past year of incentivizing people not to work. Or even on the social side, incentivizing people not to marry, and because that's what history kind of tells us, is some of these programs they become entrenched. They don't go away even if they don't work, and even though that tax credit might be higher for families, might it have the result of competing with work, and so there has to be sort of that balancing act there that it gives the the maxim that says okay, I'm going to get this totally wrong. I should have put it in my notes. The Ronald Reagan quote: "You subsidize what you want and you tax what you don't want." That was a really bad paraphrase of that wonderful quote. But so Republicans have been supportive of that child tax credit because we want to support having families and bringing on, the next generation that does, keep an economy working, as well as just a pure human value of families and raising children. But we can go too far with that where we then incentivize the wrong thing. So happy to see those two good senators out there proposing that.
That's right. Well, I'm a huge fan of Senator Mike Lee. We've talked about this many times. I think he's one of the true American heroes standing up on behalf of hardworking taxpayers here in Washington. If we could only clone another 60 or 70 of him to represent us all in the United States Senate, we would be a much, much better place right now from a policy perspective. And that one other point I think is important to make, which is, for all of the left-wing anger against the Trump tax cuts, that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that I was talking about a minute ago, that the left said, Bernie Sanders and the like would say, this is all for millionaires and billionaires, right? Let's not forget, this was a big expansion of the child care tax credit during the Trump tax cuts, as well as the standard deduction for families who don't itemize. And so a huge percentage of the tax cuts across the board went for middle to low income Americans. And so I thought it was one of the biggest misconceptions of that whole debate. And of course, the liberal media was complicit, if not driving this misconception, that it was somehow just for the rich. But it was actually a tax cut for all Americans, especially in a lot of cases, those with kids and those with families. And as somebody with a couple of young kids at home, that extra little bit has come in handy, I can tell you that.
Absolutely. And as we've seen, inflation also really hit hard lately, and just the cost of everything. Good thing that we do have that in there. But, the Democrats in Congress would like to reduce that. They would like to restrict it to the lowest income brackets, and that doesn't really serve that original purpose of spurring, inspiring, motivating families and bringing children. And we're watching growth rates and things like that, and birth rates and move-in rates, all kinds of things like that in Utah. Let's maybe pivot to Utah. Utah now, is it 13 years? It's 13 years? 14. It's 14. 14 years. Doran, I don't know if you know this, but Utah has placed number one in rich states, poor states, for our economic policy, and we're just one of the best states when it comes to the ability to prosper and start a business and move from one income class up the ladder, and we just have some of the best policies. We and Jonathan knows, though, and Jonathan reminds us as well that we have to stay always vigilant, and there are always forces to try to get us to reform tax policies, change tax policies in different ways. But what we do really well. So what is it that we're doing differently from other states?
Well, that's a great question. I get it asked almost every time when I'm out on the road, and I've been in all 50 states now, as you know, over the last 15 years of putting together this book and probably doing 1,000 or 1,500 events over that time frame. And, there's some great policy lessons to be learned from Utah, and it's a place that is, first of all, as you know well, Kim, it doesn't get a lot of things tremendously wrong, and that's important. And that you look at, in rich states, poor states, we measure a state based on 15 factors for economic competitiveness, such as taxes and labor policy and regulation. And Utah, I don't believe, ranks in the bottom half of any of the 15 factors. So that's an important point. And then, some of the gains that have been made even a decade plus ago when Utah went to a single rate flat tax and now has been to reduce that rate below 5%, which is important. I think there's some additional room to be improved on there, as other states have really cut taxes on income, especially small business income taxes and income taxes on working men and women across the country. That's one of the most important factors, I think, for being a competitive state. So Utah has some room, I think, to still improve and get that rate further down. But, you look at the property tax system, something that we've talked about many times, the truth in taxation law that's been on the books in Utah since the 1980s, which is now one of our model pieces of legislation at ALEC, the truth in taxation policy, now adopted by Kansas this year, adopted by Nebraska this year. We're taking this across the country as something that really has a rational approach to stopping the massive assessments that are happening across the country as property values rise and inflation is high, of course, this year. Something that I think Utah has really been ahead of the curve on. Also, pension reform. Our good mutual friends, Dan Lillianquist and John Dougal, Frugal Dougal, have done yeoman's work, a decade plus ago, going in and starting to transition the pension system into more of the 401k style that so many from the private sector are used to. And Utah was a real leader in that regard. And then even the last thing I'll leave you with, and this is something that not many states do well, but the financial ready Utah. And I know that you've worked on this a lot. We've talked about it, and Utah has now come up with a plan, a contingency plan, to say when these federal funds finally dry up towards the states in an era of nearly $30 trillion of national debt, what do we do at the state level to ensure that we continue to fulfill the needs that are out there, or give some of these functions to the private sector? And coming together with that commission that Ken Ivory and others from the private sector then came together, and that's one of the reasons why, for instance, the bond rating agencies have kept Utah as a AAA bond rating state, because of that contingency planning. So I think it's a lot of forethought, it's a lot of good policy, and it's it's a lot of things that don't catch the headline news, unfortunately, in many cases, but are so important for the growth of states. And by the way, I'll leave you with this on our ranking, Kim. It's not just us. Of course, it's so many others that have now recognized Utah for being one of the very most competitive states in the country. We think we were ahead of the curve there. We started 14 years ago saying you were number one, and you look at the census numbers, for instance, that just came through as they're thinking about redistricting right now, as Utah is the fastest growing state in America at nearly 20% population growth over the last 10 years. And I would say that is not a coincidence. That is the result of good policy and good free market economics that are leading people to vote with their feet and leave high tax states and go to states like Utah that have a good competitive business environment.
Absolutely. And also to mention kind of one of the basics, that we're a right to work state. And that's also very, very helpful. So what can we be doing right now as citizens? If we're writing our letters to Mike Lee, Senator Romney, our congresspeople, what are we asking for?
Well, this is a great question, and I just gave a talk to a group that Justice Clarence Thomas's wife, Jenny Thomas, asked me to speak to just yesterday, and it was a group of folks coming into Washington and working with state lawmakers and working with federal lawmakers and coming up with best practices how to engage with them from a free market policy perspective. And I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I have that I've had for a long time after working with so many elected officials, and I know this will put a smile on your face because of the constituent interactions I'm sure that you and so many others have, is, be intentional at reaching out, not just at the federal level, but at the state level, not just when you need something, but when it's, somebody needs to hear something, and not just a negative item. This is, I think, the most important point is so many of us, and I fall into this trap just as much as anybody else, only weigh in when we have something constructive criticism or something negative to say. I think it's just as important to reach out to people like Mike Lee and others that are trying to fight the good fight and saying thank you, because we know how hard it is to fight in the swamp in Washington. And let's not forget there's swamps in all 50 state capitals.
Oh, yeah, we have ours here.
Maybe less in Utah than other states. But I'll tell you what, the people, the men and women out there that are fighting the good fight, that are putting in the long hours, that are not making the big paychecks. I mean, you know this well. You make a big sacrifice for public service, working in a state legislature. You know, people need to hear the positive, that you're praying for people, that you've got their back, that you know they're going through it, and asking how they can help. That's just a huge, huge plus, and it's something that our folks forget about a lot.
Well, that's great. That's a great message to leave with us. And you mentioned our Financial Ready Utah plan, and in the contingency that the federal money dries up. I don't see anybody putting any lids on anything. Nobody's holding the line on that debt. Nobody's holding the line on the spending. But we just have to. We have to keep fighting that fight. And, as states, we balance the budget. And constitutionally, I think probably all the states are required to do that. I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do about this federal government, but we've got to be strong as states. And I think that's been even more evident this last year than ever before. Our state legislatures have to be strong. Our states have to be strong. And some of the things, and not just economic policy, but, what we've seen the federal government try to impose on our people, that the states may need to assume a stronger role, as they always should have had anyway. But thank you so much.
I couldn't agree more. That's an important point. That is the essential point right now, that Washington needs to take a page from the states. The states are the laboratories of democracy and innovation. We know it works. We know that D.C. needs to learn from Texas and Florida and Utah and Tennessee and Arizona, the states that are actually getting it right. And that's the idea of the founders, right? It was to have these competitive systems of government and let the best ideas bubble up. And here, let's hope that Washington is paying attention to what's happening at the state level.
Absolutely. And so thank you again also for ALEC and all that it does to help us at the state level, push these initiatives forward, hold the line on this federal government, but absolutely what you do to help us on tax and economic policy was just invaluable. So, and I miss working with you, but I still follow ALEC, so people can go to alec.org and read some good analyses, read more about our state, and you can also download Rich States, Poor States, and if you want one, I can find you some copies if you want a hard copy. And look at how we compare, and just an incredible resource. I just have to also put one more plug. ALEC is not just about, we hear a lot about Rich States, Poor States, but ALEC also has a couple of other centers with policy emphasis, including Center to Protect Free Speech that I was very involved in. So again, grateful for that policy work and support there. Again, bottom up, driven by local elected legislators, and coalescing behind good, solid policy. And anything else you want to mention about ALEC before we let you go?
Well, no, just thank you, Representative, and always good to catch up with you, my friend, and keep up the good work out there. Utah is a state that works. We need to replicate your successes. Of course, so many other states in the country. And of course, there's a few things that Utah can improve on. We'll be working with our good friends like our ALEC National Chairman, Stuart Adams, in the Senate right now.
President Adams,
and
yes.
Our ALEC delegations has really been a great group to work with over the years. And like you said, we're a great nonpartisan free market resource, alec.org, richstatespoorstates.org. We're here to help in any way that we can move the ball forward with good public policies.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for being with us again.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Have a good night. Thank you for joining us on Candidly, Kim. What did you think about some of those things, Dorn? I mean, that's some amazing analyses and sometimes frightening.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that Utah has done so well, kind of in spite of some of the people involved at the state level. But I think that just goes to show the strength of the people of Utah, because the people of Utah, where their hearts are, where the kind of work that we do, and our charitable nature.
Absolutely. And, that makes me think that last week we had a special election to the legislature. Representative Craig Hall announced his resignation to assume a judicial appointment, and a lady named Judy Weeks Roner was elected to succeed him. Do you know what she's famous for?
No, what is she famous for?
Well, she's famous. In fact, that's where I saw your parents. They were there. She was one of the primary leaders of the tax reform referendum.
Oh, wow.
So she went to town with a group of folks and went all over the state gathering signatures to push back on the legislature's tax reform.
That was just like a year and a half ago.
Yeah, about 2 years ago it was passed, and I don't even like to use the word reform. It was a tax mangle. I don't know what we call it. But, that was a really strong voice of the people, also, pretty across the board, nonpartisan, people everywhere. It raised the grocery tax,
right?
Lowered some taxes, raised some taxes. The more complicated our tax policies and systems get, the more they tend to become inequitable, unfair, unpredictable, unreliable. So we've had a pretty, like Jonathan said, we have a pretty flat, below 5% income tax, and our other tax policies pretty decent. But then we went all over the place that year.
Yeah.
Some things got raises, some, I don't think many got reduced. A few got reduced, some got raised. So Judy Weeks Roner went out and organized people, and they passed a referendum. The legislature quickly
got the picture, got the message,
and now she's in the legislature. So hopefully she'll take a lot of those same things.
That's a message to people out there who maybe think citizen activism doesn't pay off.
Oh, absolutely. Now, nobody has to do the kind of hours Judy does, but I don't know how many hours Judy sat at a Harmon's grocery store table and knocked doors, but lots of people did little work, and so you can make a very big difference as a citizen, and you didn't have to just lay down for whatever the legislature just handed you in a new tax policy, tax reform. But anyway, so we have some other guests coming up, some really exciting guests. We've got Cleta Mitchell is coming on. We're
Great.
Getting her scheduled, and she is going to be awesome. You'll have to Google her.
Okay.
Because she's just like enormously amazing.
And we're having a hard time pinning down Representative Steve Christiansen.
Yeah. So Steve Christiansen. Now we have let me just do a quick plug. We have a big weekend event coming, and so he's very active with that and very busy with that. But we think we're going to be able to do some live spots with our podcast this weekend at the Utah We
Connect.
We Connect. It's kind of like an auditory play on We Connect, but it's We Can Act.
Yeah.
We can act. I don't know. We can act. We connect. And because that kind of comes from a world of being deterred in our ability to connect and being canceled and separated and silenced and sequestered and quarantined and all this. So now we're going to have a big conference this weekend.
And this conference is being being organized by people who are just citizen activists.
People, just citizens. And, there's no big organizations behind it, no, big special interest money or anything. There are going to be a lot of organizations that do good policy advocacy, big community work on behalf of the people, and we, the people that will be there. But so we're going to have some guests on tomorrow, I think,
Cool.
or to talk about that conference a little bit more. Look to our website or to our Podbean site. Leave your comments. Give us a like and a follow. We're also on social media, all the regular places.
Yeah, Facebook, Rumble,
Getter.
YouTube. Are we on Getter?
I'm on Getter personally,
Getter?
and I do kind of list the podcast, but just building there. So find us there. Pretty active in Twitter.
Yeah, we should talk about Truth Social.
True. So I'm on Twitter a lot now, more than
Okay.
ever. And for whatever reason, as fast as Twitter's canceling people, conservatives are organizing and connecting
Nice.
there. So find us on Twitter there. But yeah, give us a like and a follow.
Okay.
And we'll see you next time.